Let's get into it right away today. Today's notes are entitled Big Business and Labor. I've tried to move fairly slowly with our notes the past couple of days, but we are going to try and speed it up again today. So let's see how we do. The next slide is introducing our concepts for the day. So let's read through them. What impact did the rise of industry have on society? How did it help some while hurting others? Who are the robber barons and the captains of industry? Who did labor unions help and why do they help people? And finally, why did a rise in labor unions occur in the second half of the 19th century? Moving on to the key vocabulary. Monopoly, you probably recognize. The two on here that are going to be important to understand are horizontal integration and vertical integration. And you might actually be familiar with laissez-faire as well. Trust we'll get into a little bit more later. Now, the early history of the American people, okay, and this is before we're even a country, but as many people are leaving from Europe, specifically people from England, and making their way over to the New World, they are looking for freedom of some kind, okay, whether it be religious or another type of freedom, but they are looking for freedom. Our economic history parallels that same idea. Our early economic history in the United States has been based on free trade and economic freedom. That idea of capitalism that Adam Smith introduced to the world at this time now centuries ago. Now, with the idea of capitalism comes competition. Capitalism has a belief that competition is good. But what happens when there is no competition? And essentially at that point you have a monopoly that's being created. Now, monopolies are going to create a lot of problems, and we're going to find out that they're not good for people or business. Okay? But during the late 1800s, monopolies are considered good because of an idea that has to do with Darwinism. Now, you might be familiar with the term Darwinism from science. It's the idea of survival of the fittest, that if an animal can't adapt to the world it lives in, then it will become extinct or it will die off. Okay? It has to adapt. For business, this idea is labeled social Darwinism, and the idea here is that if a business cannot adapt to the climate of business that it is in, then that business will die off. It can't compete. So monopolies are considered a good thing in the late 1800s. Now, when you do see a monopoly take place, there are going to be a couple of factors that are certainly involved in its creation. And those two factors are horizontal and vertical integration. Horizontal integration, an example of it is if I own a business, and I decide that I'm going to buy out a business similar to mine. I've eliminated that competition and built up my business a little bit bigger. Okay, so if I was somebody in the steel industry and I bought out a steel company, I've eliminated some of my competition. That's horizontal integration. I bought out a similar company. Yeah. Vertical integration is a similar idea, but it is a little bit different. In this case, I'm not going to buy out, again, if I have a steel company, I'm not going to buy out another steel company. Instead, I might buy out a company that helps me run my business. For example, I might choose to buy a railroad company because I need railroads to transport my goods. Okay. If I buy that company out, then again, I've given myself more control over all of my business, all the components in my businesses. And it allows me to start to do things like set my own wages, set wages for employees, set the prices where I want because I am getting rid of competition. Capitalism is going to allow some people to really strike it big. And the four gentlemen at the bottom of the screen here, they are four that really do make it big. They take advantage of capitalism and create monopolies and therefore create vast sums of money for themselves. And these gentlemen are referred to either as captains of industry or by many of the poorer people in the nation at the time, they are the robber barons, the ones who are responsible for the poor being poor. Okay? And these people that were that are listed below are Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, and Cornelius Vanderbilt. I'm only going to talk about two, Carnegie and Rockefeller. Carnegie is an interesting story because he is an immigrant that comes to this nation and essentially achieves the American dream. He comes with very little and he ends up making it very big. And he does this through the steel industry. And he does it through horizontal and vertical integration. John D. Rockefeller, his money is going to come through the oil industry. One thing we can say about him is that he is just like many of these gentlemen. He's going to pay his employees very little initially, but he's also going to charge very little for his oil. And this is one way in which he drove the competition out of business. He set the price of oil for so little that so many bought from him, and it drove these other companies, oil companies, out of business. And one by one he started buying these businesses, and when he had control of much of the market, he went ahead and jacked up the prices of oil because people had to buy from him. And then he kept employees' wages low. And the result was the profits of millions upon millions of dollars. So how does society respond to these business practices? And it has to, for starters, it really does help start with the laborers themselves, the industrial workers, who are mostly men, and many of which are immigrants. How do they overcome this? Because what we've seen with the Industrial Revolution is we have seen a shift to a cash economy, whereas there used to be just a survival economy, or an economy based on survival, where you grow your own crops, you grow your own, make your own clothes, and survive on your own. Now many people need money to achieve survival, and they're getting paid very little by these robber barons. So how do they survive? And they're going to get help from themselves in the form of labor unions. The basic idea of a labor union is that labor unions are going to fight for the rights of the working man, or of the worker. Okay? And one of the earliest people to really promote this practice is going to be Eugene V. Debs. And he's one of many that end up participating and creating labor unions, and that's in the late in the 1850s, and then in the 1860s we see the Knights of Labor, which at the time in the 1860s becomes the largest labor union around, and that comes to really kind of an end in 1893. And with the end of that, we actually get just an even bigger labor union, the American Federation of Labor, which Samuel Gompers begins. We also see the creation, or see this federal government get involved with something called the Sherman Antitrust Act. And that makes it illegal for trusts to form if it interferes with free trade between states. Okay? So progress in a way is made, but it doesn't really get rid of these practices that end up creating monopolies in the late 1800s. It's a constant battle, and this is something that we see in the end leads to the idea of socialism and communism. That's it for today. See you tomorrow.